Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Audra Charles stood in the dim light of her apartment, one trembling hand resting on the pregnancy test still sitting on the bathroom counter, the other clutching her silk robe as if holding herself together physically might stop the emotional unraveling happening inside her. The small, unassuming stick carried a truth she couldn't escape: she was pregnant, and there was no denying the timeline pointed to Kyle Abbott as the father. Yet instead of a rush of relief that maybe this news could heal the rift between them or pull him back toward her, she felt the ice-cold sting of reality because she knew in her gut Kyle had moved on in ways that went beyond casual flings or rebound flares. His heart, however foolishly she thought it, was leaning toward Claire Newman, the woman who had somehow managed to soften his edges without giving up an inch of her own guarded control. And as Audra replayed the last conversation she'd had with Kyle, where he'd coldly dismissed her accusations about Claire being manipulative and instead accused her of playing games, she realized the news she carried might not land as she hoped. Across town, Kyle was in society's private lounge, nursing a bourbon while staring at Claire like she was the only person in the room, his smile lingering every time she laughed, the warm, easy connection between them making it clear he was past whatever mess he'd had with Audra. So when Audra walked in, the air shifted instantly. She was stunning as always, wearing a fitted black dress and the kind of heels that could make a man lose his train of thought. But Kyle's gaze flicked over her with polite detachment before snapping back to Claire, an action that stung more than she wanted to admit. She sat down at their table uninvited, her voice deceptively calm as she said she needed to speak with him alone, Claire's brow furrowing but Kyle agreeing, more out of a desire to get the conversation over with than genuine interest. And once they were in the quiet alcove near the wine cellar, Audra took a breath, steadying herself before blurting out, "I'm pregnant, Kyle," letting the words hang in the air like a live wire, expecting, at minimum, a flash of shock, a pause heavy with recalculation, maybe even a softening in his eyes. But instead Kyle's reaction was unnervingly flat, a slow exhale and a shake of his head as if she'd told him the weather forecast rather than life-altering news. "If it's true, then I'll do what's legally required, but don't think for a second this changes anything between us," he said, his voice clipped, almost corporate in its lack of warmth, and Audra felt her nails dig into her palm as the magnitude of his indifference hit. Not only was he not coming back to her, he was emotionally anchored somewhere else, and when she accused him of running from responsibility, he looked her dead in the eye and said, "I'm not running, Audra. I just don't love you. I love Claire," each word a blade. She tried to push back, suggesting that maybe he was in denial, that Claire was using him as a pawn in her larger Newman-tinged games, but Kyle laughed, not with humor, but with a mixture of disbelief and finality, telling her that Claire had been more honest with him in months than Audra had in their entire time together. The conversation ended with Audra storming out, vowing that he'd regret this, her mind already spinning with ways to ensure he would regret it, while Kyle returned to the table, slid a small velvet box into his hand, and before Claire could fully process what was happening, he was down on one knee in the middle of society, not caring that patrons' heads were turning, not caring that Audra was still somewhere in the building, not caring about the storm he was inviting, because in that moment, all he saw was Claire, all he wanted was her, and as he opened the box to reveal a stunning diamond ring, he told her she was the only one he wanted to build a life with, the only one who made him believe in forever again. Claire's eyes widened, her breath catching, torn between the exhilaration of the moment and the lingering suspicion that Audra's sudden appearance had meaning. But Kyle's steady gaze reassured her. This was about them, not anyone else. And after a pause that felt eternal, she said yes, the room erupting into applause while, just outside the restaurant, Audra stood in the shadows, one hand on her still flat stomach, her face hardening into something dangerous, silently swearing that no matter how in love Kyle thought he was, she would make sure Claire Newman's fairy tale shattered before it could even begin, because if she couldn't have Kyle, then neither could Claire, and the baby growing inside her would become the ultimate weapon in a war that was only just beginning, a war where emotional alliances, family power, and corporate leverage would intertwine until no one in Genoa City could claim innocence, least of all Kyle Abbott, who would soon learn that indifference toward Audra Charles came with a price he was nowhere near prepared to pay. The Young and the Restless spoilers suggest that Audra Charles' pregnancy revelation will send ripples across Genoa City, but not in the way she expected. Instead of Kyle Abbott dropping everything to be with her, he does the exact opposite. He doesn't care, and he doubles down on his devotion to Claire Grace Newman by proposing marriage. What follows is a storm of betrayal, public humiliation, and high-stakes scheming that could set the stage for one of the most explosive love triangle wars in Y&R history. Audra's bombshell plan. Audra has never been a woman who leaves her fate in someone else's hands. When she found out she was pregnant, she didn't see it as a burden, she saw it as leverage. In her mind, Kyle would have no choice but to return to her once he realized they were having a child together. She imagined him torn, reluctant at first, but eventually choosing her over Claire. She could practically hear the smug congratulations from her rivals once she won the battle for Genoa City's most eligible abbot. Her plan was textbook Audra. Timing, seduction, and manipulation rolled into one. She made sure the news wouldn't come through gossip or rumor. She would be the one to tell Kyle face to face, ensuring she could watch the flicker of shock and eventual surrender in his eyes. She'd practiced her tone, her pauses, even the way she would let her hand hover over her stomach for maximum effect. Except, when the moment came, none of it landed. Kyle's ice-cold response. The scene played out in the Abbott mansion, but instead of shock and concern, Kyle's reaction was distant. "If it's true, I'll take responsibility for the child," he said evenly, not even breaking his steady gaze. "But that doesn't mean I'm coming back to you." Audra blinked, convinced she'd misheard him. "You don't care?" she asked, her voice trembling half with anger, half with disbelief. "I care about the child," Kyle clarified. "But my heart's with Claire. That hasn't changed. It's not going to change." It was a verbal dagger. The Audra Charles that Genoa City knew, the one who could seduce CEOs, outmaneuver corporate sharks, and talk her way into any deal, stood frozen, watching her grand plan crumble in seconds. Claire's unexpected strength. Claire didn't learn about the pregnancy from Kyle. She overheard Audra at society, whispering to Nate about how she would soon win Kyle back. For a split second, old insecurities crept in. Claire had fought hard to rebuild her life and didn't want her newfound stability threatened by a scheming ex. But instead of confronting Kyle in jealousy, she decided to trust him. When Kyle finally told her the truth, Claire surprised him and herself. "If there's a baby, you'll be a great father," she said softly. "But I'm not walking away from you because of this. If you still want to marry me, I'm all in." That was all the confirmation Kyle needed. 2 days later, in Chancellor Park under a canopy of white lights, he proposed to Claire, making it clear to the entire town that his future wasn't with Audra, it was with her. Audra's public humiliation. For someone like Audra, losing privately is bad enough. Losing publicly is unforgivable. The night of Kyle and Claire's engagement party at society was supposed to be her chance to remind Kyle of what he was walking away from. Instead, it became the scene of her social demise. When Kyle took the microphone to announce his engagement to Claire, every eye in the room flicked toward Audra. Some looks were sympathetic, most were judgmental. Audra lifted her champagne glass in mock congratulations, but the tightness in her jaw gave her away. The gossip spread faster than the music could drown it out. Audra was pregnant, Kyle was marrying someone else, and the baby wasn't changing a thing. Victor Newman, who had once tried to use Audra as a chess piece, smirked knowingly from his table. Phyllis Summers whispered something to Billy Abbott that made him chuckle under his breath. By the time the night was over, Audra knew she wasn't just out of Kyle's life, she was at risk of being shut out of Genoa City's power circles altogether. Nate's role in the fallout. The pregnancy revelation also put Nate Hastings in an awkward position. His relationship with Audra had been rocky even before this, and the possibility that Kyle might be the father only deepened the cracks. Nate had already been wary of Audra's lingering connection to Kyle, but this confirmed his worst suspicions. She'd never fully let Kyle go. When he confronted her, Audra deflected. "You think this changes anything between us?" she snapped. "It changes everything," Nate said, his voice low and firm. "You've been playing 2 games, Audra, and now you've lost both." Audra's next move. If history has taught Genoa City anything, it's that Audra doesn't stay down for long. Though she'd lost Kyle, she still had a powerful card in her hand, a child who would be an Abbott heir. Even if Kyle didn't want her, she could use the baby to secure financial stability and a permanent seat at the Abbott family table. But that wasn't enough. Audra wasn't just looking for survival, she was looking for revenge. And if she couldn't have Kyle, she'd make sure his perfect little engagement turned into a battlefield. She began quietly probing for weak spots in Claire's past, in the Abbott family dynamics, and in the company politics at Jabbo. Her thinking was simple. If she couldn't win Kyle's heart, she'd win control over his life one way or another. Audra's entire body trembled as she sat in the back booth of society, her hand resting on the slight curve of her stomach. The pregnancy test results weren't wrong, she was carrying Kyle Abbott's child. The irony stung like a knife. She had once thought having Kyle's baby might secure her a place in his life, but now it felt like the cruelest twist of fate imaginable. Across the room, laughter spilled from the bar where Kyle sat with Claire, his arm draped possessively over her shoulders. It was as if the last months between him and Audra had been erased from his memory, like their nights together were nothing more than meaningless footnotes. When Kyle looked up and caught her eye, Audra held her breath. But instead of a flicker of recognition, remorse, or even discomfort, his gaze slid right past her to focus on Claire who, in that moment, was leaning in to whisper something in his ear. He grinned, nodded, and pulled a velvet box from his jacket pocket. Audra's heart sank. She knew that box. Everyone knew that box. The gasp that escaped her lips was quiet but felt deafening to her. He wasn't even going to wait. He was proposing now, here, in public, while she sat a few tables away carrying his child. The room seemed to narrow around her, her breaths shallow and rapid. Claire's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes sparkling as Kyle dropped to one knee. Gasps and applause rippled through society as Kyle spoke words Audra couldn't hear over the pounding in her ears. Her fingers curled tightly into her dress, nails pressing against her skin. Yes. Claire's voice rang out, bright and victorious. She pulled Kyle into her arms as camera phones flashed around them. The crowd erupted in cheers, and Kyle slipped the ring onto her finger with deliberate care. Audra's vision blurred, but whether it was from rage, humiliation, or heartbreak, she couldn't tell. Audra didn't leave immediately. She sat, frozen, until the couple finally returned to their table. Every laugh, every shared look between them was another twist of the knife. Kyle didn't so much as glance her way. That's when the resolve crystallized. If Kyle could so easily erase her from his life, then he had underestimated her entirely. This child, their child, was not going to be hidden in the shadows. Whether Kyle wanted it or not, he would face the truth, and so would Claire. The next day, Audra booked a private meeting with Jack Abbott at Jabbo. She didn't tell him the reason, just that it was urgent. When she arrived, Jack greeted her with polite caution, his eyes already wary. She wasted no time. "I'm pregnant," she said flatly. Jack's face tightened. "And why?" he asked carefully. "Are you telling me this?" "Because it's your grandchild," Audra replied, her voice steady even as her hands trembled in her lap. Jack stood there for a long moment, the weight of her words settling like stones between them. His mind instantly began racing through implications: the press scandal, the Abbott family fallout, the corporate risks. And then there was Claire. Jack had been cautiously supportive of Claire and Kyle, but if this news reached her, the engagement could implode overnight. Jack didn't know whether to believe Audra, but he knew one thing: this was a storm that could sink more than just Kyle's personal life. Meanwhile, Kyle and Claire were celebrating their engagement at the Grand Phoenix, entirely oblivious to the chaos Audra had just set in motion. Claire's mind was already racing with wedding plans, picturing a lavish ceremony and the Abbott name tied even more firmly to hers. Kyle, for his part, seemed almost giddy, as if marrying Claire would cement his place not just in her life but as a power player independent from his father's shadow. Back at society that evening, Jack pulled Kyle aside privately. His voice was low, firm, and laced with warning. "We need to talk. And it's about Audra." The color drained from Kyle's face for a brief second before he recovered. "I don't want to hear anything about her. She's in my past." Jack's tone sharpened. "She claims she's pregnant and says the child is yours." Kyle froze. His first instinct was disbelief, quickly followed by denial. "She's lying. This is just another one of her schemes." But even as he said it, a flicker of doubt crept in. Audra wasn't stupid. Making a claim like this wasn't a casual move, it was calculated, intentional, and meant to destabilize him. The question was, would Claire find out before he could get ahead of it? Audra, meanwhile, was already crafting her next move. She knew the Abbott family would try to handle this quietly, to control the narrative, but she also knew Kyle's pride could be the easiest thing to shatter. Her plan wasn't just to force him to acknowledge the child. No, she was going to make sure his precious engagement to Claire was scorched earth before it ever reached the altar. The pregnancy news hung in the air like a storm cloud, but Kyle had already chosen his path. Audra's tear-filled eyes searched for even the smallest flicker of regret or hesitation in him, but there was nothing, only the cold resolve of a man who had already emotionally moved on. Audra, Kyle said, his tone sharper now. This doesn't change what I want. You and I, whatever we were, it's over. Audra's lips trembled, and she almost spat out that the baby was his, that he couldn't just walk away from her and pretend this didn't matter. But the smug, almost defiant glint in his eye told her he wouldn't bend. He had made up his mind. You're making the biggest mistake of your life, she whispered, the venom laced with heartbreak. When this child is born, you'll see, you'll have to see. But Kyle didn't bite. Instead, he gave her a nod of polite dismissal and walked past her, his focus already locked on someone else. That someone was Claire Newman. Meanwhile, Claire was upstairs at the Abbott house, nervously rereading the notes for the non-profit project she and Summer had been working on. She had no idea that in just a few minutes, Kyle would burst into her world with a proposal that would upend everything. She wasn't expecting a ring, let alone a declaration of love so intense that it would shut out the chaos swirling around him. Kyle walked in without knocking, his energy electric. Claire, he said, his voice carrying both urgency and conviction. I don't care what's happening with anyone else. I know what I want, and it's you. She stared at him, momentarily stunned. Kyle, what's going on? You look like you just ran from a fight, Claire said, sensing the storm behind his eyes. I don't want to waste another second, he replied. We've been through too much, had too many people trying to pull us apart. So let's just skip all the noise. Marry me, Claire. Today, tomorrow, I don't care when. Just say yes. Claire's breath caught. She thought about Audra, about the whispers in town, about how Victor, Nikki, and even Summer might react. But when she looked into Kyle's face, she saw no doubt, only determination. He was ready to bind himself to her, no matter the consequences. Downstairs, Audra stood in the hallway, listening just out of sight. Her hands instinctively went to her stomach. Rage bubbled under her skin. Kyle's rejection wasn't just personal now, it was a public humiliation. And if he thought she would fade quietly into the background, he was dead wrong. As Claire whispered, yes, and Kyle pulled her into his arms, Audra's mind was already spinning with plans. She wasn't just carrying his child. She was carrying the perfect weapon. And in Genoa City, the right weapon in the wrong hands could change everything.